mostly focus on medical devices, and as I mentioned, combination products as well. But my brief time at FDA definitely taught me how to feel more comfortable with interacting with FDA. I think it was, my first pre-submission meeting, sitting on the FDA side, I was so nervous. And then I realized after I left FDA and helping, small startups or companies, clients come to, FDA to have their pre-submission meeting, that they were even more terrified. Like I remember one guy who was trying to do a device demo, and it was like he had this, we bring it, it used to be face-to-face, and he brought it to FDA, and it was just like, and then you do, and I was like, just put it down, like let's do a video next time and pass the device around the table. I was like, this looks like you got some issues going on. So I think part of my goal was to, make people feel comfortable. FDA is made up of people. It's not, the boogeyman. There are a couple of reviewers that we've run into before that are difficult. But for the most part, they're interested. They want to see your device. They wouldn't have gone into the field unless they cared about public health and also about innovative technology and trying to get cool things to market. So that's usually my goal is to say, we're going to leave the room from the pre-submission or any interaction with FDA. We want FDA to feel like they're stakeholders, like they are invested in your product, whether it's combination product, drug, device, biologic. You want them to feel like, hey, if I help this device or this product get to market, I'm also one of the good guys that's helped patients, right? I always say industry, FDA, regulators, the thing that we all have in common is that we are all patients at one time in our life. We're going to be in a hospital. We're going to be helping someone at a hospital, taking a family member or loved one. So when you think about the technology that's helping those people, that's something that we can all see eye to eye. And we want to be helping people who need care. So, here we go. So this is RQM Plus. My team was a small company. We only had about 10 consultants, and then I sold it to a company that has 500 consultants. So now we have quality system, global regulatory support. And my team still really focuses on FDA's pre-market side of things and really for the cooler, I call them the cooler devices. They're the smaller startups, anywhere from like 1 to 20 employees as part of those companies. So feel free to email me also with any questions afterwards. I'm always happy to try and chat, or you can text me. Probably text is one of the better ways to get a hold of me these days. Almost done with the integration, and after that, I'm hoping to have a little more free time on my hands. So today's goals, I'm just going to talk about how to get the best out of the different types of Q submissions or pre-submissions. I use them sort of interchangeably. The Q-sub program is like the umbrella program, and the pre-sub, there are different types of pre-subs or Q-subs that you can submit to FDA. I'm also going to talk about really briefly the other types of pre-submissions and interactions that you can have with the agency. And the two that a lot of people ask me about are the breakthrough designation request, as well as the safer technology program, which are two programs that used to be called the expedited access program that FDA has revamped, redesigned, and put sexier names on and said, here's two programs that can help expedite a lot of the interactions that you have with the agency to get your device hopefully to market faster. And then finally, I'm going to give some examples of pre-sub questions. I'm not going to spend too long on them because I'd like to open it up for Q&A. But it's some of the questions that you can ask FDA and maybe some of the questions you shouldn't ask FDA. So we watch a lot of Frozen in our house. I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old girls. And so one of the talks I gave recently was called Frozen, or like, well, how to let it go. So, I was like, come on, this is, I feel like Elsa in this picture. I was like, come on, you can do it. Here we go. And the client gets ready and we're so determined, we're going to go in front of the agency, and you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to hold FDA back. But really the feeling, shouldn't be that you're getting stabbed through the heart with ice shards during that meeting. It really should be you're just dancing through, getting through that pre-submission meeting. You're having a great time, getting FDA excited about it. And that you just waltz in, show off your device. You feel super confident. You feel like they get it. And at the end of the day, it's non-binding information that they're going to give you, or feedback they're going to give you. So really, at the end of it, if you don't want to listen to them, you don't have to. So I don't think that's actually part of the movie. So let's go into
part of the call.
Yeah, exactly. At the end, if you just like drop the mic at that, yeah. So let's talk about making the best out of each of the Q subs. The 4 that are most common, the most most people talk about is really, the first one is just the traditional pre-submission. We have submission issue requests, or SIRs, study risk determinations, and then informational meetings. And I would say they're probably as common as they are in that order. So like pre-subs are the most common, informational meetings, very rare. So pre-submission, formal written request in order to obtain feedback from FDA. So you introduce your device, your product, you maybe put a testing plan in front of them, maybe do a protocol, and then say, we'd like you to review this information because we have very specific questions about what we're putting in front of you. I always try and say, don't make it more than 15, 20 pages, get to the point, have the discussion with the agency that you want to have, and really you're directing the narrative of that conversation, and also try and distill, make sure that you're getting the information from FDA that you want to, from what you're actually submitting. So there's no more face-to-face anymore. There are only teleconference calls at the moment. And I think that, I don't know if that's ever going to go back to face-to-face. I just talked to another reviewer yesterday, and he's like, no, I've never been to FDA. He's like, I started and I live in New York City. And then we had one who lives in Iowa, and then another one who's in Tennessee. And so they're not going to force these people back. Otherwise, they're going to have to fire a lot of people. And one thing that FDA is really struggling with right now is retention and getting people to stick around. So like, yeah, we'll see if they ever have anyone go back to the agency. The sad thing about it is that, as I was mentioning, shaking with holding this device, is it was really nice to be able to show your product to FDA and really get them to see it, touch it, see, how not scary it is. We don't really get that luxury anymore. So I always feel, as part of the interactions with FDA, really trying to either show them videos, or sometimes we'll even say, can we send you one, right? If it's a PET scanner, we can't do that. But if it's a small enough device or something that you can mail to a few of the reviewers, they really enjoy that. So as I said, I don't give an F. So the issues raised by FDA and the pre-sub do not obligate you to address or resolve those in any future submission. It is non-binding. However, you're gonna have to bring it up in one way or another. So if you're submitting a 510K or a it's like, okay, but why? Like, what was the reason that you didn't do a $100,000 usability study? So you have to give some rationale to it. All right. So submission issue requests are sort of the next most common. So it is a request for FDA feedback, but it's usually during the marketing submission. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with all the marketing lingo, but 510Ks are the pre-market submissions that, if you have a class 2 device, that's the most common type of submission. If you have a de novo or PMA, same thing. You can submit a submission issue request, and it allows you to ask very quickly, here's either the way that we plan to address your deficiency, or we have some, questions about what did you mean by that deficiency. So it allows you to resolve those issues with the agency. You do have an option of a teleconference call. Oftentimes FDA will say, can we just send you written feedback, or they may give you both options. Next one is study risk determination. Not super common, because FDA will state, if an IRB makes a determination about your clinical study that it is non-significant risk, they're supposed to honor that. FDA always says that they have the right to, push back or inquire as to how the IRB came up with that decision, but it's really for an investigational device. You want to study it. It's not approved or cleared or granted. And so is it safe to investigate in humans without getting the full IDE process or approval from FDA? And so the investigational device exemption is usually a clinical study, large packet of information goes to FDA, and they have to review it and approve it within 30 days. But you can go to FDA ahead of time in this pre-submission and do the study risk determination submission and ask them, and they will come back, the 1 or 2 page document that says, yeah, we've looked at it and you're non-significant risk, like do not submit an IDE to us. Or they'll say, yeah, this is significant risk, here are the reasons why, and this is why you need an IDE. So why they're not very common is because, heck, if FDA is gonna really honor what the IRB says, a lot of companies will just submit immediately to the IRB and see what the IRB comes back with. So informational meetings, very uncommon, but they can be useful, and FDA has recommended them from time to time to for some of our clients when they really want to just understand the device better, but you're not supposed to ask any questions. So it's kind of a dog and pony show. You go to FDA, you show them your device, say, here's, you know, what we're planning on doing, and maybe here's the timeline of how we're going to interact with you in the future. The downside to this is, you know, they can be in listen only mode, and so they may not say anything. They could just be totally radio silent in that room for the whole hour. You can usually get their attention ahead of time, earlier than you would a traditional pre-submission. So they'll often say, well, if all we have to do is show up to the meeting and you're going to show everything to us, maybe they can schedule it within 30 to 60 days. Why this can be very valuable is if you wanted to have an informational meeting and show your investors that, yes, we did go to FDA and we had an amazing talk with the agency. You don't have to say that they didn't say bogus. You're just gonna, you know, say, we had this great meeting, they were engaged, and we presented to them. And sometimes investors are like, we're not gonna do anything until we know that you've actually talked to FDA. So you've talked to them, maybe they haven't said anything in return. But I will say, as you know, a lot of the folks in the room are nerds, and so they're going to want to know, you know, they're going to ask questions, they're curious about the product. So yeah, the informational meetings that we've been part of, they usually are chatty, but they're not going to answer any questions that you have about regulatory pathway or testing. So here's just this is good, you print it out and slap it on your wall. These are the different types of timelines and the method of feedback. So here are the different ones that we just talked about. The type of feedback you're going to get from FDA, and also the time frame. The one that a lot of companies kind of get stuck on is the submission issue request. So after you get a hold letter, if you will submit your SIR within 21 days, they will, within 60 days of your getting that hold, they will respond to you in 21 days. This is calendar days. If you take more than 60 days, then they have every right to get you their feedback in 70 days. Now the hold process, if you get placed on hold, is 180 days. So you can see if you already kind of, you know, even if you submitted on day 60 or 61, you've already burned through 130 days of your 180-day hold period. So that can be pretty catastrophic if they say, hey, we need a 60-day sensitization study, you know, then you're already over the hold period. They're well within their right to just delete your file from their system. So, yeah, most of the time for the traditional pre-submissions, we get feedback 5 days before the meeting. The meeting's typically around 60 to 75 days, though they have been really squirrely recently. For the 2 most recent pre-subs, they like changed the date 5 days before and said, we can't meet next week, we're gonna meet you in 2 weeks. You don't really have any say. You just say, okay, that's gonna be in Hawaii, but cool. So, other types of Q subs. Any questions? Feel free to stop me. I talk really fast.
For the drug, it's the same time frame?
For the what?
Drug application.
So not for drugs. So there's different meetings. Yeah, sorry, I'm not going to go into all the pharmaceutical stuff. I always say to companies like, I don't do drugs.
I think
I do a lot of caffeine, so I guess
only for the medical device.
This is for the device side. And so any combination products too, depending on what's your primary mode of action. So what is the most therapeutic benefit your device has, or if it's device, then they will stick to this as well. And they'll just invite the folks from CDER, like the drug or biologics.
But how about the combination? You have a drug, you have a special delivery system. Which category?
Good question. So if oftentimes what they'll want you to do is submit a request for designation, which goes to the Office of Combination Products, and they decide what jurisdiction, whether it's going to be CBER, CDER, or CDRH. It's going to have. It's going to be the home base for your product. You know, we have one combination product that it is. Most of the feedback we're getting is from the folks in drugs, but it's housed within the radiology group. And so, and the radiology group has no clue what the CDER folks are saying, but they're the ones that are triaging all the meetings and all the things that we're coming to FDA with. So, so yeah, this is really from the CDRH side. I know CDER doesn't have, they're supposed to meet certain timelines, but they're not held to the same like 60, 75 days as the CDRH folks are.
It's longer?
I think it is. I think some, yeah, and you don't usually, you like put the request in first and then you wait, and then you submit the data or submit the package for them to review.
I see.
Yeah, but that's a good point. I should get a slide together of just the timelines. So other types of pre-subs, there's other, these are the two that I'm mostly going to focus on, but here are the other 4 that we talk a lot about: PMA day 100 meetings, agreement determination meetings. These are really for class 3 medical devices. So after you've submitted your PMA on day 100 or around there, they'll have a meeting with you and tell you all the things that are wrong with your PMA or things that they're going to need. The 2 that I get questions, as I mentioned earlier, the Breakthrough and Safer Technologies program, those are the ones that we get a lot of questions about, and also accessory classification requests. This is kind of the interesting pathway. So as I mentioned, these ones are the top 2 bullets are really for class 3 devices. I think there's there's the animation. These are the 2 I'll talk about in the next coming 2 or 3 slides. The accessory classification request, there's a guidance document that says if your product helps to enhance, augment, or supplement a parent device, like alone, your product would actually be totally useless. But if there's a parent device that it's either attaches to, or it's maybe a software accessory, if it helps enhance that device in some way, you can submit an accessory classification request as part of that parent device and get oftentimes a new product code. So but it's a type of pre-submission that you submit along with your 510K or your de novo. So FDA's allowed a few through this pathway, and it's pretty useful. I mean, if you think about, hey, if you have this product and then it can't survive without the parent device, and you don't want to have to submit a PMA or a de novo for it in and of itself, this is kind of a nice tack on, pre-submission that you just file with parent. So the breakthrough device designation, this is a lot of the companies that have really interesting technology, and they say we're more effective than everything else out there. FDA said, well, if you have that product, prove it to us and we'll enter you into this program where you can have faster interaction time with us. So all of the pre-sub meeting times and sprint discussions we'll talk about, they are condensed timeline. So you can have fast interaction, and the goal being, and I think this has definitely been beneficial for a lot of smaller companies, is that instead of waiting 75 to 90 days to get some feedback, from FDA saying, Dominic's coming, here we go. But to, instead of waiting that period of time to say, is this animal study sufficient to start so we can then, get the next piece or a clinical piece initiated, FDA will say, we're going to have really rapid fire discussions with you. So the hard thing is getting into the program from time, sometimes we've worked on probably 100 of these, and FDA says they have a 50% success rate. So they've entered about, I think, almost 900 into the program at this point for breakthrough. And only about 40 or so have actually made it through the pre-market submission process. So these are all devices that are not yet on market, and you have to demonstrate that there's reasonable expectation that you will provide for a more effective treatment or diagnosis for a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating human disease or condition. And you have to meet at least one of these other criteria. So it's either breakthrough technology, that sounds really hand-waving. The bottom one too, it's in the best interest of patients. Like if you're not doing that, then are you sure you should be trying to market a product? So there is more definition in the guidance document that spells out what do they actually mean by all of these things, but you really have to meet one. One is the hardest to meet because again, you need a reasonable expectation that you would be more effective, but think about all the other things that are out there. So if you're trying to treat a disease and there's drugs for it, maybe there's other devices, how are you going to stack up against those, and how are you going to provide some reasonable expectation that you would be more effective? The second criteria requirement isn't as hard to meet, and I don't think it's ever happened where we met criterion 1 and not one from criterion 2. So that's the hardest one to meet. For Safer Technologies program, this was a little delayed. This is like the little brother to the breakthrough program. And a lot of companies were like, well, we didn't make breakthrough. Maybe we don't have a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating disease. However, we're safer. Like there's some feature to our product that actually makes it safer. Maybe the person isn't anesthetized as long. Maybe the person doesn't have to get exposed to x-rays or some sort of, something that's hazardous, right? So FDA will say, all right, we're interested in seeing, again, reasonable expectation that you would be safer than what else is out there. And then that it's also not for a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating disease. And then you have to meet one of these. So if there's a reduction in the occurrence of a known device failure, serious adverse event, right? Like sometimes it's not for a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating disease. However, there may be some serious things that happen if the current standard of care is used, right? So we've actually every single one that we've submitted to STEP has gotten entered because, and we're very sensitive of like, if you're not going to meet it, why should we even submit? So FDA's, they're looking for more poster children for this program, but the breakthrough is nice because there's been a lot of discussion about automatic reimbursement after you get your de novo through, your 510K through. That's kind of been back and forth in Congress. But the Safer Technologies program probably will not come with that partnership of reimbursement, but it is a nice marketing tool as well. Some companies will say, well, we're STEP, you know, the FDA has essentially blessed it and said, you are likely to be safer than everything else out there. So that's a really nice feather in the cap for these companies.
Question?
Yeah.
For the breakthrough program, how frequently is a breakthrough device also a 510K device, and is that kind of a contradiction?
Right, so a lot of us thought that, right? Because if you're a breakthrough, you should be something's unique, and why would you be able to demonstrate substantial equivalence? Interestingly, I think it was a few months ago, I talked to the folks at the breakthrough program, and they said, well, for like the 35 or whatever that had made it through at that point, about 10 of them were de novos, 10 of them were 510K, and like 10 of them were PMA. So I mean, that doesn't equal 35, but there was like pretty split up, right? Like they said, and the reason is for the 510K pathway, maybe there's a technology or there's a regulation that already exists, but there may be a new indication you're going after, or maybe it doesn't trigger new questions of safety and effectiveness, but again, it's going to be more effective. And so FDA has allowed it. There was a really, it was a critical paper of the breakthrough program that was released a month ago, and FDA, in response to it, put together a website that says, here are the devices that have breakthrough and the ones that have made it through the pre-market process. And it was very interesting to see, like, what do they actually have to do? It's hard for anyone to tell if it actually expedited things. But I will say for the ones that do have breakthrough or STEP that are clients, like they do, if they use this sprint program appropriately, it can actually really speed things up. Because if you think about it, if you're doing a pre-sub for 90 days, but instead of sprint discussions about a 21-day turnaround, you can get the equivalent of 3 pre-subs in that period. So yeah, it's 21 to 30-ish days. So yeah, any other questions? That's a good question. What does it get you, right? Interactive, timely communication. The FDA also says it gets you priority review. That is not what I have seen. I think the expedited access pathway, which I said this was that was the original name of the program. They kind of got rid of that because people were like, there's nothing expedited about it. Essentially, you get more reviewers on your file and they just like crap on it, and you end up taking years longer than you probably needed to. So yeah, the priority review, people thought, oh, I'm going to get put on the top of the pile when my de novo shows the FDA. I haven't really seen that. They stick to their 150 days if it's a de novo, or the 90 days if it's a 510K. Review team support. So I think that is pretty accurate. You do get additional folks. Usually there's more upper management, not there to like stifle things, but there to make sure that the reviewers aren't muddying things with, their misunderstanding of the regulations. So that, yeah, review team support, senior management, efficient and flexible clinical study design. I have not seen that as well. Usually they're like, no, we want you to do the clinical study like everybody else. Same thing, post-market balance of data. Nope. We've proposed that on many occasions saying, listen, this doesn't make sense to force us to do this study ahead of time. Why don't you let us get through, and then we'll continue the post-market study and send you those data. Nope. They, what's dangerous there is they might say, oh, that's a good idea, but still do all the pre-market side of stuff. So you have to be very careful when you, offer some of these things to FDA. Manufacturing considerations for PMA submissions. So yeah, there's For a PMA approval, before you are approved, you do have to get inspected. And so there are some considerations where they may be open to not, letting you slide and not look at your manufacturing processes, but some things, especially if you're a smaller scale. Haven't seen that though, but we only have one PMA and it's not breakthrough. So I'm curious as to the ones that have gotten that. So this is kind of what a sprint discussion looks like. This is part of the pre-sub sprint discussion that we send in. We usually will propose, here's the date that you're going to get it. So on, January 5th, we said we're going to ship it. We know day one is going to be January 6th. So they get it. They pretty much immediately call us. They say, we have your file. We're going to set up a teleconference call with you. That 7-day telecon is really valuable because we'll say, here's what's in the package. Here's what we want out of this sprint discussion. And they'll say, all right, by the 14th, we're going to get you written feedback. On the 21st, send us any slides and we'll go through the feedback. If you have any questions, we can discuss it then. So this is our proposal, right? So we've done on the left-hand column, that's really us saying this is what we'd like. And FDA will come back and say, we can't do the 14th, but we can do the 18th for the written feedback and maybe the 27th for the telecon. Does that sound acceptable? So it's really a negotiation, it's a more collaborative environment. So that's why I like sprint discussions. It really helps if the reviewer is on your side, right? So again, going back to that stakeholder statement of like, if they can really understand the value of your product and want to help you, it'll make everything a lot easier. So I like the examples that FDA puts together in their pre-sub, and I also gave some examples of ones that we've gotten recently. So what's funny is that you're not supposed to ask regulatory questions as part of your pre-submission. FDA will say you're supposed to submit a 513G, and don't submit a 513G unless you really have to, because they can take up to a year or 2 years to get feedback. They're not under the same requirements of FDA's response time. So pre-subs, they really have to they're supposed to get back to you within 90 days, and Congress holds them to that. So however, so you're not supposed to ask regulatory questions, but there are some regulatory strategy questions that you can weasel in there. So you can say, do you have any concerns with the predicate device proposed? And why that's a very valuable question is FDA could come back and say, we don't think that's a good predicate. We actually can't find any predicate for you, which is a pretty clear, reading of the tea leaves that this is likely going to be a de novo or a PMA. Hopefully de novo, because at that point, if you're like, listen, here's all the precedent of all the devices that are regulated in a similar fashion, is there something about our technology that this predicate isn't appropriate, is appropriate? So they know all our sneaky ways of us asking regulatory strategy, and they're usually, they don't want to beat around the bush either if they can help it. So they will, we have one company went in and I was like, oh, this is definitely a class 3 PMA. And the client said, nope, take everything about that out because we want this to be class 2. And I said, well, I'm not going to say it's class 2, but I'll just take all the regulatory stuff out. First thing, they sat down and the branch chief looked at me and she said, do you know there's a regulation for this? And it's a PMA. And I said, oh, really? That's really valuable information. And I was like, I wanted to say I told you so, but I was like, look, we're going to put that in the meeting minutes and we have our answer. So, every once in a while, they will give you very direct regulatory responses, but oftentimes they'll say, you have to kind of, read between the lines. You can ask clinical study questions, animal study questions, which can be very valuable. They'll have veterinarians as part of the review team and look at your animal study and say, here are the other endpoints that we'd like you to consider. Something for clinical study, they have medical officers as part of most review teams. So there's usually 2 doctors, MDs, as part of any group at FDA, and they have been consulting, like pulling in contractors recently. So we'll have some of the pediatricians here from so it's very interesting to get that feedback and also hear what their concerns are. I usually in that pre-sub meeting, I really want FDA to talk and tell clients, do not interrupt them. Awkward silences can be fine. Just let them, if they have, hey, tell me more about that feature. So the client will say, oh, this is the XYZ. And then I'll say, can we just go back? Can you ask me why you're asking about that feature? Do you have any concern about it? And be like, I'm just thinking about what would be the impact of this on that population? And so that's a really good thing for us to capture, to understand how are we going to address that in the future pre-market submission. All right, so this is one of the questions we got from our went to FDA. I've kind of redacted some stuff in here. Does FDA accept the approach described above regarding the design and manufacturing of patient-specific devices? And they all say, the nice thing, the provided approach is acceptable. The subject device should be comparable to the predicate. Like, in addition, identify, justify, and conduct testing on the worst case device version. So it's really nice when they give you very clear feedback. Sometimes it's not very clear feedback. So we believe that the subject device is the same intended use as the device here. This is kind of that predicate question. Does FDA agree that this is an appropriate predicate? We have decided it is not an appropriate predicate for the proposed device for the differences. In contrast, the proposed predicate measures blah, yours doesn't. So this is their hand wavy way of saying, if you can identify a predicate, then great, it may be possible as a 510K. However, we're not aware of a predicate that has the same intended use as your device. Therefore, a de novo may be appropriate. So this is really nice information to get, because they're essentially saying, hey, feel free to prove us wrong. This is non-binding information, but this is pretty clear to me as a regulatory person saying, yeah, they're pointing us down the de novo pathway. The other thing to consider is the meeting minutes. So you'll have the FDA meeting, and even for like submission issue requests or even just informal discussions, sometimes we'll have a clarification call with FDA. You're well within your right to put meeting minutes together and send them to the agency. The nice thing is, and oftentimes they'll revise them. Sometimes I'll put the lead reviewer's name in here and they'll cross it out and say FDA confirmed that the sponsor is correct. Yeah, this is something that it's within 30 days of you submitting the meeting minutes, they're supposed to get back to you and say whether or not they agreed with everything, and those are the final ones. You can push back if you didn't like what they said. You can say that's not how we remember it. And the next thing after that, if you want to push back on it, is they'll accept it and they'll say thank you for your feedback, and then they close the file. So it's just you stating that you didn't recall it the same way, and they file that as part of your submission, but what they remember is what matters. Yeah.
Can you do an audio recording of your pre-sub?
Cannot. Yeah, you're not supposed to. So they will say, you're not supposed to, and they'll say that in the housekeeping, like, please no recording of this. And your meeting minutes are due within 15 days of today, calendar days. Yeah.
It's okay to use the content of the minutes for an investor or marketing purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes we'll put in the meeting minutes. Some, FDA stated they were very interested in seeing this device get to market. Like if they said that, heck yeah, I'm going to put that in there, right? And investors love that as well. We will also wait until day 15, because oftentimes if there's something in there, or oftentimes we'll get someone who speaks up that says, well, maybe it's a good idea for you to do 1,000 subjects clinical study. That doesn't happen very often, but I'm just making a example of like something we don't want them to remember. It was just kind of thrown out there from FDA, and I'm like, I'll put that in the meeting minutes before I send it to the client, and I'll strike it out. I'm like, I say, listen, this is good for us to remember that they said that, but we don't want that to go back to FDA. They're of course well within their right to put it back in if they remember it, but there's stuff in there that I'm like, oh, that's going to be, again, if we have to address that in a future pre-market submission and say, you said this and this is why we didn't do it, I'd prefer it just not being in there in the first place. Additional considerations. So at the end of the pre-submission, or the feedback that they send, they'll often say, hey, although our review focused on addressing the questions you asked in the course of reviewing your pre-submission, we also noted the following. It is not intended to be an exhaustive list of issues. What's very valuable is when they give you these additional considerations, is it's something that they're like, hey, we're going to give you some extra free consulting here. Sometimes it can be very damning, right? It can be like, oh gosh, they want us to do this, test that was not on our radar and we don't want to do. But it's nice too if they're saying, hey, we recommend you look at these EMC wireless coexistence testing standards. If you're going to be testing your device to voluntary consensus standards, we offer the following suggestion. So, it's nice they sort of are trying to give us a little bit of a leg up, so we can reduce the amount of time it's going to take to actually get this in front of FDA, and also the time that's going to take to address their concerns if they have a hold letter. And I guess that one's kind of interesting because FDA does recognize certain standards, but if you use a standard that's not recognized by FDA, you just have to rationalize why, why you didn't conform to the standard, or why it's the standard that's not recognized, but why you're still using it. So there's some very valuable stuff that they put in the additional considerations. This one, they said there's, it was going to be something that collected data from EHR or electronic health records. So the following interoperability standards may be applicable. So I like it when they say maybe, because we can look at these and say, actually, they're not.
Yeah.
Or we can say, oh, holy smokes, yeah, those are actually really applicable to us. Thank you for that feedback. We have a lot of devices that are using machine learning or AI. So FDA is really trying to get ahead of this. It's hard to catch up to this and give some feedback as part of those additional considerations. So that's it. That's all I have. But I think from my take and just based on the many pre-subs that we do, I feel like this month is slower, but we usually have about one a week. I think the nice thing is FDA is interested. They're curious about the devices, and if there is some sort of negative person in that room, you can also have I think it's good to set up ahead of time, like who's going to play good cop or bad cop, and say like that's a great question. We haven't really determined that yet. We'd love to circle back with FDA and a pre-sub supplement at a later time. Kind of shut those things down. But really, if you can leave the room and FDA is like, yeah, we like this device. We want to see you come back. We want to see the product get to market. How can we help? Those are the big wins. So, yeah, any questions?
I have a question on the previous slide on the algorithm demographic stuff.
Yeah.
So let's say you're using one or two sites and your demographics are representative of those areas, but not necessarily representative of the country at large. How does the agency view that algorithm trained with unbalanced demographics?
Right. So not super kindly if you can't justify it. Right. So, and this is something that's been a critical path initiative of the agency, because there's been a huge complaint that like a lot of devices are not designed for women, people of color. Like, if you have something that's that only works on a very small population, that you can't say this device is only intended for white men from the ages 45 to 55, right? That's FDA's gonna be like, no, you gotta, you have to evaluate your device better than that. But if there is some sort of rationale, like here, we went to this other country, and even though they're, it's not completely representative of the US population, the disease in that country is similar to the disease in this country. And, if you can make the case of also the care is similar, that's also something we've run into. So if the treatments are different, or the standard of care is highly variable from what we see in the US, or the training of the physician, right? If the physician is going to do something different as a resident here in the US than in Australia, then really walking FDA through and saying, this is why the training on the algorithm is acceptable. They can always push back, and they will if they don't agree with it. But we have seen more de novos, more submissions that have gone through completely OUS. I mean, there was one was like everything was done in Denmark, and they were fine with it, or some files where it's like the prevalence in another country is very different than in the US. So it is just providing that rationale. Again, if it is a de novo or something that's really the benefit of the device and getting the benefit of the device and getting it on the market far outweighs the risk, then FDA really takes that into consideration as well. The 510K process also has a guidance document that says, listen, if you're not meeting the level, say you're an aid to diagnosis or some sort of device that isn't meeting the level that the predicate had, but your device can be implemented far and wide. It's not something that, or it can be in someone's home instead of forcing someone to drive 5 miles to the hospital. The benefit of that device versus the risk of it not being maybe as accurate. Maybe that is gonna tip the scales for you. So it's providing that rationale to FDA, and we've been pretty successful at saying, this is worth it, you want this on the market. Don't force us to be substantially equivalent, like to the letter of, for perfect apples to apples, because this is gonna be good for patients.
And if I can add to that, what I have also seen is it's helpful to have awareness about what that special population is providing to you. So sometimes it's the extreme values you can get from other countries, right? And what that gives you is you need to enroll less patients in the US in order to achieve that goal. And that's a justification because you've reduced the clinical burden, right? And every person that participates in the study, there's an added risk. So there are other approaches you can take too, and they go for that a lot of times.
Where the diagnostic go to, the medical device or the drug, where it goes, there are the special
Mostly device.
And I just that my personal experience, if I have an assay which is just save time, not even save money, not even, but you have an open surgery and then you can quickly test the positive or negative and then you can continue, right? If it just save time, is that worse?
So if it's time, I always go back to the definition of medical device, right? So
Right.
FDA makes it very clear if it's meant to cure, treat, mitigate, or diagnose a disease or condition,
Right.
you're likely a device. If it's, so you bring up a good point though, if you're, let's say you're mid-procedure and that, pathology is gonna take hours, but you're gonna just do this quick assay, it's pretty rough, it's not gonna give you all of the information maybe that the pathology would, but it's it's going to speed up the time that this person is, under anesthesia, or it's going to, you can make a better decision, right? Moving forward. FDA is very interested in those, and so it might not be a predicate to the pathology device or whatever, the ELISA or whatever the standard.
Nothing new device, it's just the assay is quicker, it saves more time, but like the surgery, you need to decide which margin to cut, right, for the cancer patient. If you can clearly know which draw a margin and then you can continue the surgery, right? And save a lot of time.
Yeah, I've seen margins devices, the challenge I think for a lot of those is the classification, because I think if it's something where it's truly moderate risk and it could be a 510K, like how you were first explaining, like, yeah, that sounds, maybe it could be 510K. If it's for something for cancer margins or something for a disease that may be life-threatening, then, or it's a really truly a life-sustaining or life-supporting device, because if you get those margins wrong, that person has, the risk of them ending back in the hospital or dying changes, right? So if that's truly the case, it may be a class 3 product. And so FDA is going to look at the risk of the device, but also the risk of speeding up. Like, what is the risk of making it faster? And does it truly, does it outweigh the risk or the benefits of the other current methods? So, but I think, I'm really excited a lot for a lot of the ML AI based devices that are able to detect. I mean, there's stuff out there now that's like clearly better than a physician, right? Like, I think there's stuff I'm like, I'd much rather run through this algorithm than, somebody who's totally sleep deprived looking at my charts. I want their take on it too, right? So that's the thing. I think FDA is more comfortable right now with like an aid to diagnosis, right? This is going to give the physician another tool in their toolbox for her to make the decision on, this is cancer, this might not be. And so, really, I don't know, providing that additional information. FDA is not super excited about making it a pure diagnostic yet. So for things like that of saying, we're going to replace a doctor, I think that's, and it goes to the various groups at FDA. You mentioned like, where does it go? There's a whole office dedicated to in vitro diagnostics, but for the digital diagnostics for neuro, right? For diagnosing if someone is having a stroke, if they're having a seizure, if they're having, if there's a pediatric disease, like how do we say this is gonna aid in diagnosing and getting this person maybe care earlier than they would have been able to if they were just showing up at their doctors or being triaged at the ER. Cool, good questions. Thank you guys. This is super fun. I love talking, I like nerding out, especially with Tallest around.
Do we have any more questions?
I guess I can just quickly, does it matter, like bigger companies, filing FDA submissions versus small? Do they look at that, say, oh, a startup? Like these huge companies where they have their regulatory, have, 10 people that can read the submission and make sure everything is done, whereas like a smaller company where they have 3 people doing everything. Does that factor in or no?
Totally does. It's funny, like FDA would never say that it does. They would say,
Yeah.
I know the Medtronics of the world have to do the same as the small 2-person startup. I think where we see a lot of the larger companies are just willing to do the test, right? So we want you to do all of the hemocompatibility, all of the biocomp testing. The bigger companies will be like, fine, we'll throw $100,000 at that. It'll take 2 months and we'll get it all done. For the smaller companies, they're like, that's gonna like kill our company, right? So, and I think FDA, they are sensitive to that, and they also, so they don't want to put the company out of business for the sake of just, go kill some bunnies for me so I can feel like this is gonna be safe, right? So, yeah, so they'll deny it. They'll say no, and we look at everybody totally separate or the same. And but yeah, in my field, especially I mostly work with smaller startups and companies. I think FDA gets more excited about the cooler tech, in my opinion. I think there's, I think one of the recent talks that I heard, there was an FDA person that said 80% of all submissions that went to FDA last year were first-time submitters and small companies. And so when you think about all of the med tech that's coming over from Europe, we have like a lot of companies from Israel, from Finland, from Sweden, Australia, South Korea right now. We're seeing a huge influx of companies wanting to get into the US market because it's a huge market, but it's also a known entity. Like they are known quantity. They can say, I will have 75 days before I hear back from FDA, where I just talked to someone who's in Mexico and he said, oh my gosh, some things take 30 days and some take 1.5 years. We just have no idea when we're going to hear back from some of these regulatory bodies. So yeah, I think there's just a lot of interest, and FDA is putting forth these programs to say, like, how do we become the innovative country that's supporting, breakthrough, safer products, and also things that other countries are going to want to get their hands on as well.